is a senior instructor with ITSM Academy. She's been with us for, I don't know, 1.5 million years, maybe, Rose, something like that. Absolutely one of the best instructors in the industry with lots and lots of knowledge to share. And Rose put together this new presentation, and Rose, you did a fantastic job with it. So I've got 2 polling questions, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do them at logical points while you're talking, as opposed to taking up any more time, since we just lost a couple of critical minutes there at the beginning.
Sounds
okay, good. I thought I lost you again.
Sounds good. I just wanted to make sure you were finished there. Welcome, everyone. And as we proceed today, our focus is going to be on the guiding principles and how they lead the way. And these are the guiding principles that are introduced in ITIL 4. ITIL 4 gives us a new and a fresh perspective to service management, but also gives us a holistic approach to best practice. And as we look at these guiding principles, from idea all the way through to the realization of value for customers, the ITIL guiding principles kind of beam like a lighthouse beacon, like the brightest lighthouse beacon. So if you can visualize a beacon and a lighthouse leading the way, we're going to take a look at these guiding principles and how they can help you to lead the way. And also keep in mind that these guiding principles that we're going to discuss can be applied to any and all initiatives throughout your service management journey. So this might be what you feel like. You know, it's an understatement to say in the upper left-hand corner there that navigating through complex systems can be challenging. And many times when practitioners and managing professionals are adopting and adapting ITIL, they find that what they're doing in practice does not seem conducive for what ITIL is recommending. And it can become daunting and perhaps sometimes a little bit overwhelming in some organizations as we try to navigate and address the challenges of these complex systems. And then we have things like governance, regulatory, legal requirements, and just the overall continual need for change that adds to the complexity. So a fun way that ITSM Academy likes to use is the idea of the ITIL Island. You might have seen or heard that before here from us at ITSM Academy, or perhaps from others. But basically, in order to separate what we do from what we are learning or hearing, we say, stay on the island, or come to the island, man. And in other words, as you learn, try not to think about what you do, but rather what is the best practice recommending. And it may or may not fit, or it may or may not fit at least at this time in your environment, but be open. Once you stay on the island and then you understand, the idea is that ITIL best practice is not a mandate. It's not a standard, but it's a recommendation to help you to remain relevant, but also to ensure your success. So you can then, once you understand, adopt and then adapt, and then adopt a little bit more, and then adapt, but when and where it's applicable. So we'll use this little idea of the ITIL Island as we begin to navigate through the guiding principles. One thing for certain, and for you to keep in mind, is that the guiding principles that we're going to discuss today are relative. They are applicable for all at some level. So each and every one of you will be able to apply these as you adopt and adapt to meet dynamic needs. So stay on the island, think ITIL, and take a walk with me as we kind of search for treasure on this ITIL Island with the guiding principles. So the ITIL 7 guiding principles that we're going to explore today are here. Focus on value. Let's take a walk through. Start where you are is another guiding principle. Keep it simple and practical. Progress iteratively with feedback. Think and work holistically. Collaborate and promote visibility. And spinning in there at the end is optimize and automate. So these are the 7 guiding principles that we're going to walk through. Some people take exception when we say use the best practices or the guiding principles or any other framework because we want to do more with less. Sometimes the words we use can invoke fear and intimidation into people. And so I like to say, and most would agree, that we can do better with what we have. So these guiding principles lead the way so that you as service providers can do better with what we have, but also to support continual improvements as you evolve to meet your consumer ever-changing needs. So before we begin, I would like each one of you right now to think of an improvement initiative. We all can improve somewhere. So this might be one that you know that you need, but you haven't been able to get any traction for. Perhaps there's an improvement initiative on the horizon or one that you are in the throes of today. But in the spirit of we can do better with what we have, think on that for a moment. And it might be a very large initiative or a very small micro improvement initiative. You pick. So now as we kind of take this journey around the island with ITIL 4 guiding principles leading the way, as we go through, think about your improvement initiative and how you might apply what you learned today to those initiatives. So keep in mind that the guiding principles are universally applicable to nearly any and all initiatives, but also I wanted to make the point that they're not exclusive one from another. So even though we kind of saw them in this order and we'll be going through them in this order, these guiding principles interact and depend upon each other. So they don't stand alone, nor are they linear or sequential. So, and as you consider your improvement initiative, note that you could start today. And so think about that and the relevance of each one of these as we go through, but also think on how they will apply in combination one with another. So the first guiding principle that we're going to discuss today is focus on value. Not all of the guiding principles will be critical in every situation, but I will say that all of the guiding principles should be reviewed on each occasion to determine how relative they are and how they can invoke power in combination. But this one, I think, is the exception. I believe that in every situation, we have to keep calibrating, checking, and then validating that the focus is not subjective. So, do other stakeholders in your initiative have the same understanding of value that you have? Or do you have the same understanding of value as other stakeholders? Value can't be subjective. So focusing on value is really critical. So it makes sense that if our mission is to deliver value, we all need to, that means all stakeholders within the initiative, get levels set on what value really is. So the challenge is, what is value? And in best practice, everything you say, everything you do, every initiative that you trigger and work towards should link back to value. And focus on value is primarily focused on the creation of value for customers from the customer perspective. IT cannot determine what is value. The developers, the architects, they can't determine value, nor any other function within your organization. So I would suggest that from this day forward, when you see or hear the word value, get out of IT. Value is always from the consumer perspective, and only the customer can determine what is valuable to them. So in order to focus on value, we need to have that outside-in perspective. And if we as service providers are going to deliver that value, we need to have intimate knowledge about who is our customer, what is the service, and how are the users going to be consuming that service. So not only the customer, but we need to look at value from a consumer user perspective. And for each and every customer and consumer group, we, the service provider, have to identify and agree the outcomes that are required. Outcomes are critical. Outcomes are keys. They're golden keys. They unlock value. And so we need to not only identify what are the outcomes and agree with our customer, identify and agree, we need to quantify those outcomes and put them into measurable terms. So the primary focus for value is from the customer and the consumer perspective. But remember that there is always some intrinsic value that can be gleaned also. You might have heard the term previously, value captured for the organization. And value captured for other stakeholders within that value stream. Things like cost savings through efficiency, increased revenue, growth capability or customer loyalty, reduction in resources required. So there's a lot of value that is gleaned by adopting and adapting these best practices and using the guiding principles. But when we say focus on value here, the primary value is that to the customer or consumer. If you haven't already, you will be hearing more and more about the CX, customer experience, and the UX, the user experience. So high-performing organizations today are advancing very quickly to include things like XLAs, and that is X as in excellence. XLAs. And XLAs might be supported by SLAs and OLAs, but they're very, very different. And so the emphasis globally is kind of shifting to that CX, UX, that customer and user experience, like we see reflected here in this principle, focus on value. And this principle also kind of reveals the influence of lean and service management on ITIL. Letting the voice of the customer drive what we deliver. So when you're applying this concept, this guiding principle, focus on value, and we think about how this principle impacts us, we need to understand that everyone in the organization contributes to the creation of value. And so everybody within the organization, once they know, has to maximize the value they create. So it begins with understanding who is your customer, what is the service, how the consumers are using the experience, and what are their expected outcomes. But we have to continuously work with the customer, and we have to work with the customer early in that value stream to identify and quantify those outcomes that help us to drive value. So the focus on value ensures that all stakeholders and the practitioners, including your staff, should have that outside-in perspective. And that is a clear understanding of the customer user experience and how they can contribute to that experience. And this is a huge cultural shift for some, isn't it? Remember, we take one little step at a time. We don't have to boil the ocean. And that leads us into the next guiding principle, which is start where you are. When we think about this guiding principle and we start traversing through the ITIL Island here, think about this one. There's often a tendency, particularly in IT, to chase that next great silver bullet. And it rarely makes sense to abandon one approach in pursuit of the next, right? It's the tool, it's the framework, it's this, it's that. Reorg, right? That's an infamous one. So many have fallen into that trap of infinite pain and at some point had suffered the results of that kind of a perspective. So it's likely, as we're thinking about this guiding principle, start where you are. It's very likely for some that you can leverage from 75 to 80% of what you already have in place. So what is key here is to recognize that there may be some areas where you will have to radically rethink the way you do work. So we can leverage from existing collateral, but be open and know that we might have to re-engineer some aspects of our existing practices and processes when and where it makes sense. So change enablement is a really good example. Some change models that worked in the past 10, 20, 5 years ago, maybe 5 minutes ago, right, that worked then won't work in today's environment. They won't help us to deliver the type of acceleration and speed that we need and the velocity that we need to meet our consumer demands. So we need to make fact-based decisions. If we have that outside-in perspective, this one, start where you are, is going to be easier. So fact-based decisions enables all of us to ensure that we're focusing on meaningful improvements. And we don't want improvement just for improvement's sake. Meaningful improvements when and where it makes sense. So start where you are. And as we look at this application of this guiding principle, we need to, yes, look at what exists as objectively as possible, but I'd like to also share some tips that you could use and consider in your improvement initiative and how you might apply this guiding principle. So the first of the 3 tips is, when looking at start where you are, honor the past. And that's kind of what we were alluding to earlier. There's been a lot of work, a lot of resources, a lot of effort that has gone into your service management approach. And many of you here in this webinar or listening to this recording, you yourselves have spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get where you are today. So remember this first tip, and I got this from Donna Knapp from ITSM Academy, and she always says, honor the past. But the real tip is this: don't be bound to it. Honor the past, leverage from existing collateral, but don't be bound to it. You know, that we do this because we've always done it kind of aspect. So, and recognize, as it states here in the last bullet, that sometimes nothing from the current state in some areas, right? Sometimes nothing can be reused in that area. And then the second tip that I'd like to give you in the application of this guiding principle is decisions on how to proceed should be based on accurate information, and that accurate information should be obtained from direct observation. We need to directly observe our customers and consumers and how that service is being played out on a day-to-day basis. And then we can support that observation through other metrics and measurements and reporting. But it's, again, it's that outside-in perspective. But warning, warning, danger, Will Robinson. Right? Over-reliance on those metrics and measurements, on our data and analytics and reporting, can kind of sometimes introduce a bias, and that presents a risk in our decision making. So In other words, we don't want the metric or the measurement to become the target. We want the throughput and the value and the usability to become what we're measuring towards. And then thirdly, the last tip for application of this guiding principle, start where you are, it's important to emphasize that it's all about continual improvement. So making fact-based decisions is going to be helpful and enable us to ensure we're focusing on the improvements. And, you know, Goodhart's law kind of speaks to the fact that anytime a measure is selected as a target, or the metric or the measurement becomes the goal, it ceases to be effective. When the metric or the SLA is the goal or the target for any siloed aspect of the throughput, it's not effective. And not only that, people start to game it. In other words, we can make the numbers say what we need them to say. But there's no real visibility then, if that's happening, into whether or not what we're doing is actually adding or is it taking away? Is it a non-value add activity that we're performing in the entire throughput for the value stream? So one way to consider if a measurement is effective is to question what action has been taken as a result of this metric or measurement, or as a result of this report. And, you know, if there is none, if there's no action that's being taken as a result of the metric or measurement, then you can question, why then are we measuring it? If there's no action being taken as a result of the metric or measurement, why are you measuring? And so that leads us to this: keep it simple and practice. So as we look at this guiding principle, to be frank, sometimes the common sense factor has to come into play. And I say that with all due respect, because sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, as many are, in working throughout the various years and the complexities of these integrated systems, that we get caught in the minutia. And sometimes we miss the obvious. And so it seems that in general, as IT service providers, if there's a way to make something complex and complicated, we seem to have that down to an art, don't we? And I did a study and found that left brain engineers and heavy thinkers love to stimulate the neurons in their brains in the same way that a runner stimulates endorphins by running. The more complex the system becomes, the better we like it. And the same thing, if you're kind of a right brain creative kind of individual, the more you can create, the more moving parts and colors, the more we are stimulating their brains. As it turns out, there's hundreds of neurons and trillions of connections in our brain. And the brain, think about it, is the command central of everything. The brain is the command central of everything we think, everything we say, and yes, of every solution that we might come up with. So our brain is thirsty for information. And the more information we allow in, the more eager our brain gets. And that cycle kind of generates this demand for stimulation. So we kind of see how this complexity can become addictive, and how many become addicted to tech. So a new way to think about this, keep it simple and practical. So a new way to think about this is to stimulate these neurons and think about, how can I make this solution more simple? Then look at the solution again. Think once more. How can I make this even more simple? So the idea is to challenge this creative, eager brain to work hard and to stimulate those neurons with simplicity. We need just enough process, just enough governance, right? Governance is not going away. And to say that we can operate without process is kind of just crazy thinking, because really a process is just a set of related activities. And a lot of times we want to focus on automation. So we want to have just enough process, just enough governance to enable us and give us guidance and to be able to meet regulatory and legal. The more complex something is, the more ways there are for it to go wrong. So keeping it simple is just one step towards creating a world where people get up in the morning and are inspired to go to work. And not only inspired to go to work, but love to do the work that they're performing. So when thinking about applying, keeping it simple and practical and ensuring value, look at the second bullet here. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. We have to make it easy for people to do the right thing. And we, from our own experience, recognize that complex or over-engineered processes, bureaucracy, confusion, all take time and effort that is likely better spent elsewhere. So combine this principle, keep it simple, with focus on value and progress iteratively with feedback. There is another guiding principle that we're going to take a deeper dive into that we were introduced at the beginning of this presentation with the idea of progress iteratively. And so that's one way that you can keep it simple. Take small increments, units of improvement, one little sip at a time. And an iterative approach can help us to keep it simple. And simplicity, by the by, is really the best route to achieving quick wins. So here we are walking through the guiding principles. Did you notice that the island is changing? The island is evolving, and so is your organization. We kind of shapeshift, we morph as an organization, as service providers. So as our consumers change the way they do work and our customer requirements shift, we, the service provider, have to shift and change in return. So business requirements are dynamic. They're not static. And therefore, we, the service provider, have to be dynamic, fluid, shifting and changing continuously along with the business. And what's really key is we have to do it fast. Responsiveness is really key. We can deliver value and we can do it fast. The challenge is to do so and still ensure stability. So we don't have to give up one for the other, but stay the course and use these guiding principles as your beacon to kind of lead the way as your island is shifting and growing through mergers and acquisitions, perhaps, or sometimes there's new markets that generate demand and you're going to grow. Sometimes there are spin-offs or other factors where you're going to be shrinking, and that's your strategy. But if nothing else, we can agree that demand and opportunities are constantly changing. And so we want to progress iteratively. If we need to be dynamic, constantly changing, moving, and fluid, and responsive as a service provider, then we need to progress iteratively. And so this principle, progress iteratively with feedback, really has the influence of Agile and a little bit of DevOps on ITIL.
Rose, perfect timing. So I just threw up the first poll. We'll let you keep going as people answer it. And I'll be honest that I have a little app on my phone called Time Hop, and it shows me all my social media and pictures this day last year for the last 9 years, whatever. We asked this question exactly in this format 6 years ago today on a webinar, and I'm really interested to see the difference in what the last 6 years has done. So, and we are only at 38% voted. So this is Lisa. If you can hear me, please pop over and just answer this quick poll for us. Thank you very much. I am going to close that down, and I will. Oh, people are still answering. One more second. Sorry, guys. Thanks, everyone, for playing. I think it's really interesting to do the compare and contrast to last time. So we are at 64%. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to show the results. So 6 years ago today when we did this, it was only 7% who said yes, and I think about 14% who said sometimes. And there were a big balance of whatever that number is left that was at no. So interesting. We are making progress. We are moving the needle. Go team, go industry. All right, I'm sending it back to you, Rose. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.
And that ties right in with this, correct? We're progressing iteratively, a little bit at a time. So, you know, Agile talks about taking an iterative, incremental approach to development. And the reason that that's so important is that here in ITIL 4, we're not only talking about applying this idea of incremental improvements to development, but to, in this case, all improvement initiatives. So this ensures that very small units of value are being deployed. Because improvements are small, the frequency of your improvements should increase. So it helps you to evolve and get some value out there and evolve along with your customers. And one approach in applying progress iteratively with feedback is to just start with one small, very micro improvement initiative and then get feedback. And then the next iteration or round of improvement is going to be based on that feedback. So we're kind of combining some of the ITIL 4 guiding principles here, because by getting that feedback, it allows us to focus on value. It allows us to co-create with our customers. It gives us greater flexibility, faster response time, and also more manageable iterations that can be executed and completed in a timely manner. The focus on each effort is going to be sharper. So the more we can execute and do it in a timely manner, the sharper we'll become and the easier it will be to maintain. But probably important to note is this feedback loop is shorter and faster because of these small increments in getting the feedback. So as we reevaluate based on the feedback channels, we need to use a lot of different methods for how we're going to get the feedback from our consumers and customers. And it's going to vary based on what the improvement initiative or the deployment is. But operating and deploying based on feedback is going to help us to build trust within our organization and also avoid very costly mistakes. It's going to allow you to hit the mark, right? So it's not in contrast to other methods that you might be using. For example, DevOps introduces the 3 ways. Some of you might be familiar with that. The flow of work is the first way from left to right. And the second way is shortened and amplified feedback loops. So seeking and using those feedback loops throughout and after each deployment, make sure that we're focusing on where the rubber meets the road, where the value proposition is really being realized. And so the next guiding principle, as we walk through these 7 guiding principles, these seem very simple, don't they? But they're deceptively simple. They're very simple, but combined together, can be extremely powerful, and none more so than collaborate and promote visibility. And embedded in this collaboration and promote visibility is communication. Communication has always been a key principle of service management. And so as we think about this, communication and collaboration are both required, but there's a distinction. Both are required, but communication is different than collaboration. So let's focus on that for a moment. Some people, when asked, what do you believe is the distinction between communication and collaboration? Some people have told me communication is one way and collaboration is two ways. I understand that precept, but think about this. From an ITIL best practice perspective, communication in ITIL is always two ways. In other words, when we communicate, a decision or a directive has already been decided, and we notify or tell an individual or a group about this communication. So ITIL teaches us then we have to validate that the information that we communicated was received at the level it was intended. So communication is always two ways. You communicate and notify, tell, but then you have to validate that the message was received at the level that was required. So that infers then that simply sending an email or publishing something out on a share is not communication. So communication is always two ways, and we have to validate that communication. It's also important when thinking about communication to think about what methods and mediums are you using to communicate. We have to ensure that we're mixing it up. First and foremost, you need to know who is your audience. And so the idea in understanding who is your audience, for example, a communication to a C-level individual is going to be different perhaps than a communication to a staff member for various reasons. And then that communication to your outside consumers and customers might be framed differently and use a different medium. So the idea is that we need to meet people where they are and use more than one method of communication. Okay, well, that's great, Rose, but this says to collaborate. So I haven't forgotten, we're going to speak to the collaboration side of this best practice. There we are, collaborating together towards a shared goal and common target. So collaboration then, let's focus on that. Collaboration, on the other hand, is quite different than communication. With collaboration, we identify first who are our stakeholders in this initiative, and we engage those stakeholders. So stakeholder mapping is going to be a critical skill set with collaboration. Who are the stakeholders in any given value stream that have to be engaged? And stakeholders will vary depending on what the problem is or what your improvement initiative is at hand. Those stakeholders, once identified and engaged, will then collaborate, meaning brainstorm, discuss, and really seek to create the solution together. That's very different than communication, where the solution or the direction has already been decided and somebody is telling us. Collaboration infers that the stakeholders create the solution. And when improvement activity occurs the other way, in relative silence, or with only one small group being aware of details, assumptions and rumors can run rampant. We get resistance to change, and we have a very difficult time, and sometimes the initiative fails as a result. When we do not collaborate, resistance to change kind of rises up because people speculate about what is changing and how it might impact that. impact them in their day-to-day work. So this is a really good principle if you're looking at how to shatter the silos. By the way, I'm declaring the year 2020 the year of shattering the silos. 2020 is the year to shatter the silos. And cooperation and collaboration are better than isolated work. If you have functional teams that are localized and don't know where they fit into the whole, right? Isolated, that's siloed activity. And we need to engage and incorporate those people and those practices into that holistic perspective where we can co-create and accelerate value. And then also promoting visibility. Making work visible in this guiding principle helps to reveal hidden agendas and improve the information flow. So the more people are aware of what's happening and why, the more they're going to be willing to help. Now, there will be some decisions that have to be made, and communication is going to be required. But we want to move more into a collaborative kind of culture where we identify our stakeholders and engage them. Remember that people do not resist their own ideas. And if we really want to figure out how to do something, ask the people that are doing it on the day-to-day basis. Let's get them engaged. And as we focus on that promoting visibility side of this guiding principle, promoting visibility is making the work visible. And there's a lot of tools out there, and a lot of organizations are doing this. You might be using Kanban boards to help make work visible. If you're doing Agile and you're having your daily stand-ups, that helps to promote visibility. Other techniques like value stream mapping, as defined in ITIL 4 service value system and value chains, that helps to promote visibility. And there's many, many more methods and mechanisms that allow people to see where they fit into the whole, what work is being done, and give some transparency, some openness. And there's a level of trust that's going to be required when making work visible. So we can see what work we're working on, who's working on it. It helps us to prioritize the work and maybe even reprioritize the work that's being done in order to get some assurance of value. And I promise you, it's worth the effort. It's worth the effort to try to see where and how can you start making things more visible so people in their local teams or functions can see where they fit in to that overall work. And it really helps an organization have that holistic perspective that we started with, and that holistic perspective helps you to drive improvements. So collaborate and promote visibility. All right, we're moving through the island with the ITIL 4 guiding principles, and we've come upon this one. We've kind of come full circle a little bit. We started with the idea that best practice says that we need to work holistically, and this is also a guiding principle. This guiding principle, think and work holistic, really brings in the idea, if you're familiar with systems thinking. And along with all of the other guiding principles that we have discussed. So understanding the different levels of complexity is really needed for effective decision making. So with this guiding principle and systems thinking, we look at how applying methods and rules designed for systems can be improved upon, can be made more simple, can focus on value, how we can collaborate and progress iteratively to start improving them. But, remember that applying methods and rules that are designed for a very simple system can be very ineffective or even harmful in a complex system. So we need to understand the ecosystems that make up our entire service value system, and then where the relationships between those components in those ecosystems are relative to our value proposition. So think and work holistically. When thinking about applying this particular guiding principle, not only do we need to recognize the complexity of systems and collaborate, but where possible, if you look at the third bullet here, where possible, look for patterns of interactions between the ecosystems and the elements and the components within them. The patterns of interactions between these systems in the holistic perspective speak to the need to understand which elements of the system are critical to success and how the relationships between those elements influence outcomes. Do you remember outcomes? Outcomes are keys. They're golden keys that generate value. And so tying these patterns of interactions in the systems to those elements that generate value can help to optimize and enable us to shift and change, and even maybe even open up new doors of opportunity. And automation can help. Automation can help. So where the opportunity is conducive and where we have sufficient resources, we can look at where we can use automation to support the visibility for the organization of these complex systems. And that ties right into the seventh guiding principle that we're going to discuss today, and that is to optimize and automate. There's an old adage that if you're doing things wrong and you automate them, what's going to happen? You're going to do things wrong faster. As a matter of fact, in a recent workshop that I was working in, I made a statement and said, you cannot automate chaos. And one participant interrupted me and said, oh, yes, you can. That is exactly what we're doing. And some of you might feel like that as well. So I stand corrected. You can try to automate chaos, but the likelihood is that you're going to create more chaos. Yes, and more chaos at a faster rate. And so how do we apply this idea of optimize and automate? Really, the key to automation is to optimize. We need to optimize before we automate. So in order to optimize, think simplicity. We're bringing in keep it simple. We need to simplify. In other words, when we say simplify, remove any or all non-value add work, non-value add. So we want to increase our flow of work in that value stream from idea to value realization. So we need to have the appropriate velocity and cycle time to meet the cadence for that demand that's evolving from our consumers and our customer experience. So simplify, simplify, simplify. That was Ford's motto early on, and eventually evolved in what we see today as an assembly line in manufacturing. And so as we think about optimizing and automating, in summary, baseline your current performance, simplify, remove non-value add, and then use your baseline metrics to measure your achievements again. And make sure, once again, that those metrics are outcome-based and focused on value. And so we've taken a journey and traversed through the ITIL Island with the 7 guiding principles. And remember, ITIL and other frameworks do not stand alone. ITIL will complement and enable a holistic approach for strategies, governance, and for all of your best practice methods and frameworks. You don't have to choose between one or the other when it comes to frameworks and best practices. It's better to think of ITIL, Agile, DevOps, Lean, Six Sigma. These are tools that are in our toolbox, and they all have a unique and different purpose. So we need to assess the frameworks, those that we have in play and maybe those that we need, and look at how they dovetail together for that holistic perspective in the service value system that is introduced in ITIL 4. And you're likely to see a lot of the same concepts and precepts bleed through these frameworks. Why? Because they work. So a great example is the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act. That was at the core of the TQM initiative decades ago. And we see that cycle reflected in Agile. We see it reflected here with take small increments of work and get the feedback. We see this Deming cycle also reflected in the 3 ways of DevOps. And also in ITIL with ongoing continual improvement. So as we come around the bend with these guiding principles, remember that continual improvement is a good thing. We can all do better with what we have. And so where can we improve? And it involves embedding this into people's way of thinking. So as you think of these guiding principles, apply them along with this continual improvement model from ITIL 4, and you have a very, very powerful framework for ongoing, incremental, evolving improvement within your organization. I'd like you at this point to take a look at these activities. Take a look at these activities. Which one do you think trumps all of the others? Which one is more important? It's hard to tell, isn't it? You might be looking at what is the vision? We need to know what is the vision and what's that holistic perspective before we jump right in. Or you might be thinking taking action is important because if we don't take action, everything else is for naught. And you know, if you think about this, there really is no one correct answer. For every product or service, value stream, process, tool, improvement initiative that we are deploying, even if you did all of the due diligence, when do you really know where the gaps are? When do we really know, even if you did a gap analysis up there where you're looking at where are we now and where do we want to be, you did a full-blown, it was the most perfect gap analysis ever in the world or ever in the universe. We never really know where the gaps are until what? It's in operation. So also think about this. What if this was the most perfect deployment ever in the history of deployments? What do we know if it's a perfect deployment and we got all the way down here to did we get there and we said, yes, we did. What do we know? If it hasn't already, something is going to what? Something is going to change. And so the most important part I would suggest is this. How do we keep the momentum going? How do you keep the momentum going? Do you have a system, meaning roles, responsibilities, tools, people? If I have feedback, where do I give it? Who picks it up? Who's going to respond to it? Where does it go? How is it going to be prioritized? Will it sit in the bottom of a queue until it's no longer relevant? Or do I start an improvement initiative after customers are leaving and have gone elsewhere because I can't be responsive? So my question is, what is your system for feedback? How will you keep the momentum going? don't get overwhelmed, there's hope. You can apply these guiding principles that we talked about with this continual improvement model to any and all improvement initiatives. And doing so really results not only in cost reductions and efficiency, but that kind of rapid response that we need to improve the customer experience. And the real benefits of continual improvement come when the organization as a whole has a culture that supports continual improvement. So remember that the ITIL Island and your island is constantly changing. The way consumers work, the way that we support them. So we're never done. But applying the guiding principles together with the continual improvement model from ITIL will enable you as an individual, maybe for your team or your organization as a whole. But doing so will generate a very robust, potent juggernaut and a base for rapid response to dynamic, fast-changing business and consumer needs. The world we live in today, right? All right, so at this time, this is our time for Q&A, but I would like to do a little activity. So once again, if you're listening to us in listen mode, please join us in the presentation. Come to your computer or webinar device and let's go to chat. And is everyone here? Please come in. Firstly, if you have a question, please feel free at this time to open chat and enter in your questions. And we'll start a Q&A here in just a few minutes. And we'll wait for a moment for those questions to come in. And while we're waiting, if you do not have a question, please go to chat and let us know, what did you learn today that you did not know before? What stood out for you? What was significant? What is one thing that perhaps inspired you to take action? And what is your next step if that is the case? And so basically what I would like to hear from you is, what's in this for you, your team, or your organization? And so I'm going to turn this over right now to Chantel. And Chantel, are there any questions coming in?
Hey, Rose, I'm sorry if you get any background noise with my computer. Apparently, I'm having some issues today, but hey, how are you? And the webinar was wonderful. Thank you so much. We are kind of at time, Rose, but we do have one question in the queue. But before I get to that, I'd like to just thank everybody once again for joining us. And we really appreciate you coming and visiting with us today. I'd also like to remind you that our next webinar will be scheduled for Thursday, February 20th, where Vicki Rogers with Georgia Tech will tell us about adding value with change management to your organization. At the end of this, once you log out, you will be asked to do a post-webinar survey. Please take the time to do that. That really does help us to pick topics for future that you might be interested in hearing about, and so we can have a continual service improvement organization as well. So the question we have, Rose, is I found very interesting. You at one point had said that, I'm sorry, I lost my question, that start where you are. And we were asked by Ken, if you start where you are, is probably going to be with a robust ITIL V3 environment. If you then apply focus on value and keep it simple, would that lead to undoing a lot of what you've already accomplished with V3?
That's an excellent question. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some questions. If you want to continue on with questions, please stay on. If you have to drop off due to time, this is recorded and we'll have a recording of the Q&A. So please stay on and we'll take as many Q&A as possible. And if you joined us today, we'll ship out the answers to the Q&A along with the slide deck to everybody. So as it relates to ITIL V3, absolutely not. Like I said, likelihood is 80% of what you have in play from ITIL V3 is already applicable. So what we're doing as the organization evolves And as your customer experience evolves, Ken, we want to be adopting and making better those things that we applied. You have a wonderful, if you've been following ITIL V3, a wonderful foundation likelihood is an incident, problem, change, and other processes and practices. So that's what I meant by leverage from that, but understand that the world, it is a changing, right? So using the guiding principles and the continual improvement and the other best practices in ITIL 4, we can leverage from that foundation that we have from ITIL V3 and use it to evolve as our business evolves. So did that answer the question there, Ken? Okay, good. And then Chantel, anything else right now?
No, Rose, not at this time, but a lot of really positive feedback, really, really nice feedback. I agree. It was a fantastic webinar. Once again, Rose, you've done a wonderful job for us. Keep in mind that we do have the ITIL 4 classes available. The new ones for the advanced level are coming out later in 2020. We're in current development. The dates of those classes are on our website. And currently, if you want to come to one of the advanced level ITIL classes, we're having a 50% off the ITIL Foundation class. So if you buy the advanced class, you can get 50% off of your foundation class, which is a requirement to take the advanced classes, even if you currently hold ITIL V3 certifications, okay? If you have any questions or concerns about that, my name is Chantel Harris. I am the Director of Sales for ITSM Academy, and I can be reached at charris@itsmacademy.com.
All right, thank you for everyone, to everyone for attending, and I hope to see you in future webinars with ITSM Academy. Thank you all.